podcast. Over 8 days, we'll experience the revolution where it actually happened, from Versailles and the streets of Paris to the grand chateaux far beyond the capital. If you want to explore history with me and fellow history lovers, join the waitlist at greathistory.com right now. Those who join the waitlist will benefit from early bird pricing, and places are strictly capped. So, the waitlist is the only way to make sure that you don't miss out. Go to greathistory.com, join the waitlist, and I look forward to seeing you in Paris in 2026.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Grey History, episode 104, The Cult of Reason. As dechristianisation surged into Paris, radical revolutionaries seized their opportunity. From forced abdications to the infamous Cult of Reason, the capital became centre stage for festivities and farce. But before we examine this controversial cult, it's only right that I acknowledge the true believers who keep this podcast preaching. Thank you so much to the Grey History community. This show doesn't run on miracles, so if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider sponsoring these revelations at patreon.com. For the price of a coffee or two a month, you can enjoy the enlightenment of bonus episodes and the mercy of ad-free listening. Your support makes all the difference, so please join the community today at patreon.com. Of course, it's with tremendous pleasure that I welcome the newest, greatest people on the planet. A warm welcome to the newest virtuous citizens, Brendan, Peter, Deidre, and Marlena. Another warm welcome to our newest true revolutionary, Benjamin. Thank you to every member of the Grey History community for your incredible generosity, and a special salute to the Pantheon of Heroes, Brian, Jeff, Kevin R., Scott, Howard, Hilberto, Kevin S., and Griff. When the Republic dawned in 1792, the most recognisable building in Paris was the Cathedral of Notre-Dame. Come 1793, that was a problem. Seen by some as a monument to superstition and fanaticism, this iconic giant could not be left untouched. In 2019, fire ravaged the cathedral due to the negligence of humanity, but 2 centuries prior, it was deliberate destruction which shuttered this house of God and replaced it with a temple of reason. Just as the Deputy Fouché is seen as an apostle for regional dechristianizers, his equivalent in the capital was Pierre Gaspard Choumet. The procurer of the Paris Commune, Choumet was one of the most senior figures of the Parisian government, holding a position loosely equivalent to that of the city's chief attorney. Along with his deputy, the prominent journalist Jacques Hébert, the two men had proved incredibly apt at marshalling sans-culotte sentiments and pursuing an ultra-radical agenda. Remember, on the 4th and 5th of September, both had led efforts to surround the helpless convention. The result was policy success. As autumn arrived in 1793, the Hébertists were no doubt pleased by the government's concessions. From price controls to the trial of political opponents, the Jacobin Convention had bowed to popular demands. Yet, there was at least one issue that remained insufficiently addressed. That was the moral regeneration of the nation. Having witnessed and participated in Fouché's Festival of Brutus, the capital's procurer had seen firsthand the growing systemization of anti-clerical policies. Returning to Paris with no shortage of inspiration, the Ultra was determined to replicate Fouché's crusade. Almost immediately, Chumet restricted public worship, while Fouché's reforms for funeral processions were likewise adopted, at least in principle. Thus, in October 1793, dechristianisation was steadily emerging in the capital. With committed supporters in town hall, the political societies, and the National Convention, proponents looked to emulate events in the departments. Critically, although the Commune is famous for championing dechristianisation efforts, it was the Convention itself which pioneered early victories. Memorably, the new revolutionary calendar is perhaps the most visible attempt to expunge centuries of superstition. In rendering Sundays obsolete, adherence to the Republic's calendar provided a pretext to move against public worship and Christian ceremonies. However, anti-clerical deputies did not stop there, pushing further to ban priests from becoming teachers and mandating the deportation of any cleric denounced by 6 citizens. This measure was aimed squarely at the constitutional clergy and signified a growing breach between the patriotic priests and their employers in the government. Yet, days after the formal implementation of the new calendar, we see a dramatic and sudden escalation in Parisian dechristianisation. Interestingly, this momentum came from the outskirts of Paris, inspired by events in the departments. On the southern fringes of the capital, 2 small communes decided to embrace the nascent anti-Catholic movement. To start with, the small town of Ries sent a delegation to the convention. There, its envoys made 2 simple requests. Firstly, that the commune be allowed to eject its priest, calling the cleric useless and promising to fill the void with patriots from the political societies. Secondly, the community wished to change its name to something more revolutionary. Henceforth, Ries would be known as Brutus. But, as discussed in the last episode extra, renaming Republican France, actions like these could inspire a little competition. So it was on the outskirts of Paris. Down the road, the commune of Mency joined the party, asking not only for a name change and the ejection of its priest, but also the suppression of Catholicism altogether. The petition presented is rather remarkable and touches on several points of the last episode. Consequently, I want you to note the following. Firstly, changes to the town's name. Secondly, the seizure of church assets and their delivery to the national treasury. And finally, how notions of the people's will and popular sovereignty could be used to justify the suppression of religious freedom. On the 6th of November, the petitioners from Mency addressed the government. Republicans, the sans-culottes of the commune of Mency, composing the popular society, congratulate the National Convention on its work and applaud the days of May 31, June 1 and 2, as well as the vigorous measures it is taking to consolidate liberty and equality, and invite it to remain at its post until the Republic is purged of its tyrants and their satellites, and the aristocracy has been broken at the foot of this holy mountain. Counting our days by your kindness, we come to offer you the tribute of our gratitude. The popular society of Mency is aware of the abuse of prejudices and the necessity for the people to be guided only by the sound morality of liberty and equality, which appalls the fanaticism which the priests use to seduce the unenlightened citizen. The name of a former priest and the presence of a priest are 2 things that society wishes to forget. According to this principle, society undertakes to protect the oppressed, to relieve the indignant, and to console the dying. It asks you, legislators, to decree 1. That, as of this day, the commune of Mency shall no longer have a priest. 2. That the presbytery be immediately put in place for sale as national property, as well as the parish lands which have not yet been sold. 3. That the building formerly serving as a church become the place of the meetings of the popular society. consequently, that the busts of Marat and martyrs replace the statues of St. Peter and St. Denis, their old patrons, that on the middle of the altar there be placed the statue of liberty. Finally, that every sign of fanaticism disappear before that of liberty. 4. And that the commune of Mency-Villeroy be henceforth named Commune of Mency-Marat. We come in the name of the Popular Society to offer you the salary that the nation paid to our priest, all his clothes, the silverware to be melted down for liberty, the copper to make cannons which, supporting the courage of our young republicans, will make our tyrants bite the dust, and the linen to be used to bandage the wounds of our brave sans-culottes. From my perspective, this petition is fascinating. Demanding their commune no longer have a priest, the delegation sought to repurpose the community's church and rename the whole commune after none other than Jean-Paul Marat. Offering the priest's former salary and even his clothes, the people of Mency-Marat volunteered all they could for the cause of universal liberty. Yet, as interesting as these acts are, it's how the convention responded which I find truly remarkable. While one might presume that radical Montagnards leapt to support the petitioners, it was actually more moderate Jacobins which seized the opportunity. One deputy, Claude Bazira, demanded the convention recognise the rights of all towns to refuse the establishment of a parish within their boundaries. Put differently, if a community wished to close its church, it would be free to do so. The convention agreed, justifying that all citizens had the right to adopt the religion that suits them and to suppress religious institutions that displeased them. Going further, the deputy Thuriot entered the fray. Thuriot succeeded in passing a motion that entrenched such matters as the jurisdiction of local governments. Thuriot's motion confirmed that departmental administrations could suppress parishes or adjust them without the explicit approval of the convention. In plain English, this meant that the regional bodies could eliminate or reform parishes without national oversight, a tremendous win for local dechristianizers. In fact, it would take only hours for these laws to have serious consequences. But before we witness the resulting explosion of dechristianization, I want to note the two politicians pushing this anti-clerical agenda. Neither Bazira nor Thuriot were Albertists. In fact, we heard Thuriot denounce the party of rogues and scoundrels after he resigned from the Committee of Public Safety in late September. Remember, it was his dramatic speech, warning of barbarism and tyranny, that triggered a full-blown assault on the committee, resulting in Robespierre's famous intervention, which directly linked criticism from the convention to an international plot to debase and divide the government. So, why are two deputies known for their ties to Danton and moderation and their hostility to ultra-radicalism joining the ultra-radicals in pursuing dechristianization? That is a brilliant question. Put a pin in that, as we'll return to it later. The Grey History Tour is now live and tickets are rapidly disappearing. In the first 24 hours, almost half the tickets have been claimed by fellow listeners who want to relive the revolution with me in May 2026. Joining us are Lois, Peter, Michael, Rohan, and others, so don't delay as the waitlist is filling fast. Go to greyhistory.com right now and secure both your spot and your early bird pricing. Places are strictly capped to ensure the benefits of a small group tour, so pre-registration is the best and potentially only way to join us in Paris. I look forward to meeting you personally in revolutionary France. The gravity of the convention's actions were immediately apparent. No sooner had the government empowered communes to officially close churches did the capital's dechristianizers spring into action. Leading the charge was the Prussian exile Anacharsis Cloots. Alongside several other foreigners, Cloots wasted no time in accepting the convention's invitation. Heading straight to the home of the Bishop of Paris, they dragged the poor priest out of bed. Informing him that the people demanded he sacrifice his office, the bishop agreed, promising his imminent resignation. The next day, Gobel arrived before the local authorities, followed by a group of priests. There, the Jacobin-aligned cleric fulfilled his promised abdication. Seizing their opportunity, the dechristianizers of Town Hall decided to take the party to the convention. In short order, Chumet and Mayor Pache joined Gobel in an elaborate delegation to the seat of national government. There, Gobel renewed his resignation. Citing the will of the people, Gobel claimed that there must be no other public and national worship than that of liberty and holy equality. Replacing his Christian headdress with a red liberty cap, the deed was done. Paris was without a bishop. The response to this coerced act was applause and emulation. Not only did Gobel's priestly colleagues renounce their own positions, but so too did many members of the convention. Although not numerous, some deputies had once been clerics. In fact, some had been constitutional clergy, even bishops in the constitutional church. Several proceeded to resign their posts, careful to defend their prior work as patriotic and well-intended. Joining his Catholic brothers, Julian of Toulouse, a Protestant minister, attacked charlatanism in all its forms. According to Julian, he would henceforth have no other temple than the sanctuary of the law, no other divinity than liberty, no other worship than that of the fatherland, no other gospel than the Republican Constitution. Gobel's abdication as the Bishop of Paris had an impact far beyond the capital. The various components of dechristianization often occurred at different times, and in the case of resignations, Gobel's departure led the way. Historian Michel Vauvel states that the events of 7 November unleashed the first mass wave of abdications. In fact, the great majority of resignations occurred over the subsequent 6 weeks. Altogether, just less than 20,000 priests eventually left their posts, representing more than half of the constitutional clergy. This was an astronomical number. Factoring in that the non-constitutional clerics had already been driven from their stations, the former First Estate was now a mere shadow of its former self. Of course, in addition to abdications, it's worth noting clerical marriages. Such unions had predated the dechristianization campaign, but as we saw with Fouché in central France, they rapidly increased in numbers due to the pressure from revolutionary authorities. Indeed, it is worth noting that marriages were the initial focus of some dechristianizers. It wasn't until Gobel's abdication that sufficient momentum was provided to push for a more complete repudiation. Now, to digress for a moment, it is interesting the discrepancies that can be found when looking at marriages and abdications. Firstly, we once again see dramatic differences between regions, with neither of these acts occurring uniformly across the country. For example, in the southern department of Lozère, the total number of resignations tallied to a mere 20. However, Lozère was seen as a Vendée in waiting, and there most clerics had previously fled rather than compromise with the new regime. Consequently, Lozère was a region with few abdications, simply due to the fact that it lacked priests. However, it did experience a high rate of iconoclasm and vandalism, perhaps because there were so few priests to target directly. On the flip side, at least one Norman department saw more than 700 abdications. Compared to Lizère, that's a multiple of 35 times. So, instances of abdications were by no means even. Equally irregular was the distribution of marriages. Although there were perhaps 17 to 20,000 abdications, there was only about 6,000 marriages. This means that the majority of abdicators did not go on to marry, and in fact, some priests agreed to marry, but refused to resign their office. Diving into the data, we do see some curious trends. Those clerics willing to wed were generally younger, perhaps keen to start a family while they still could. Additionally, one's former profession seemed to be a factor. While all clerics tended to avoid marriages, this was particularly the case for parish priests. However, individuals who had once belonged to religious orders, such as monks and friars, tended to be slightly more romantic. That said, I can't stress enough that clerical marriages were generally unpopular and weren't always voluntary. Like abdications, weddings were sometimes forced upon clerics who were threatened with imprisonment or worse. Remember, we saw in the last episode Fouché demand that priests either wed or adopt a child. Given this, we have no shortage of records of priests who claim they were coerced into marriage, or, in the case of one, bribed into marriage. Historian Timothy Tackett notes the impact of these events as they spread across the country. Throughout France, priests and pastors were forced to resign their posts and cease celebrating the sacred offices. And, in large areas of the nation, revolutionary leaders went even further, pushing Catholic clergymen to repudiate the priesthood altogether and, if at all possible, to marry. Those who failed to follow such directives were sometimes imprisoned. Whether through fear or conviction, a certain number of priests enthusiastically denounced their previous sacerdotal functions. But by far the greater number quietly retired, profoundly disillusioned with a revolutionary process which most of them had long supported and which had now turned against them. Yet, while marriages and abdications spread across the nation, developments in the capital continued unabated. Following Gobel's abdication on the 7th of November, the dechristianizers were eager to maintain their momentum. Consequently, just 3 days later, Chumet and his radical allies hastily prepared a festival of liberty. Having partaken in Fouché's Festival of Brutus, Chumet had grand plans. Put simply, Chumet and his allies believed Catholicism had to be replaced. Substituting past errors with a new, secular religion, the revolutionaries would invent something that could provide the morality, rituals, and social cohesion normally associated with traditional faiths. The result was the cult of reason, and it carried all the familiar aspects of a conventional creed. From temples and festivals to saints and sacred days, the movement looked and felt like a normal religion. But it wasn't. Unlike Christianity, the cult of reason was an openly atheistic project. It did not promote the existence of a god or divine entity. Instead, it elevated reason as the guiding force of humanity. By teaching civic duties and instilling republican principles, the new cult aimed to craft model citizens while supplanting ancient superstition. As such, its success was viewed as essential. Without it, France would slide backwards into fanaticism and tyranny. So, as Chumet sought to mark the triumph of philosophy over ignorance, the procurator turned to this atheistic cult, drawing on the renouncements of nearby communes like Brutus and Mency-Marat. The Parisian authorities embraced an aggressive and blatantly anti-clerical strategy. Seizing the Cathedral of Notre-Dame, the dechristianizers transformed the Grand Church into a temple of reason. In the festival which followed, an elaborate mountain was constructed inside the church. Built with pillars, scaffolding, and no shortage of drapes, its summit was adorned by a miniature Greek temple dedicated to philosophy. Further down, one found a torch of truth, and below that, at the mountain's base, were busts of famous philosophers. Two of these saintly figures are perhaps easy to guess, but alongside Voltaire and Rousseau sat the still living Benjamin Franklin. Yet, to further insult the capital's sincere Catholics, the festival hired a woman to impersonate the goddess of reason. Provocatively dressed in white drapery, a mantle of blue hung from her shoulders while her hair was covered with a red liberty cap. Joining her were young girls dressed in white, who themselves were crowned with roses and bore a tricolour sash. Having celebrated reason in a ceremony attended by all the sections and local authorities, the dechristianizers of the Commune returned to their tried and tested playbook, bullying the convention. Setting off to the seat of national government, the procession arrived to demand the convention's attendance. Determined to secure his triumph and force the convention's submission, Jumet proclaimed the success of the day and invited the deputies to partake. You have seen it, citizens and legislators. Fanaticism has relinquished its hold. It has abandoned the place it occupied to reason, to the fatherland, and to truth. Its shifty eyes could not withstand the brilliance of the light. It has fled. We have seized the temples it abandoned. We have regenerated them. Today, all the people of Paris gathered beneath the Gothic vaults, so long struck by the voice of error, and which, for the first time, resounded with the cry of truth. There we sacrificed to liberty, to equality, to nature. There we cried, "Long live the mountain!" And the mountain heard us, for it came to join us in the temple of reason. We did not offer our sacrifices to vain images, to inanimate idols. No, it is a masterpiece of nature that we sought to represent, and this sacred image inflamed every heart. A single vow, a single cry was heard from all sides. The people said, "No more priests, no more gods than those that nature offer us." We, its magistrates, have received this wish, and we bring it to you. From the temple of reason, we come to the temple of law, to celebrate liberty once more. We ask that the former metropolis of Paris be consecrated to reason and liberty. Fanaticism has abandoned it. Reasonable beings have seized it. Consecrate this property. In response to this audacious address, the convention was forced to comply, proclaiming that the people of Paris had rendered great service to the nation. The deputies had no choice but to smile and join the unsavoury festivities. Yet, while anti-clerical conventionals eagerly embraced the opportunities presented by the government's embrace, such as formally renaming the Cathedral of Notre-Dame to a Temple of Reason, others viewed these developments as nothing more than an absurd humiliation. Once again, the Albertists of Paris had forced their will on the nation, and, once again, the Paris Commune had dictated policy far beyond its jurisdiction. Consequently, many would have agreed with the conclusions of historian Jean Jaurès. The ultras were the masters of the capital. But it wasn't enough to manhandle religion. Priests must be made to confess that they had lied, that they had misled the people. Taking their ornaments from them was a good thing, but having them reject their stoles and then trample on them was even better. And the ultimate triumph of reason would be for the priests to de-priest themselves, to reject the God they had so long spoken of, and reveal to fanatics the emptiness of the tabernacle where human illusion had resided for centuries. A great triumph. On November 7, Cloutz and a handful of others convinced Gobel, the Bishop of Paris, to go to the convention and abjure his functions. Other abjurations followed. Large numbers of priests resigned, either out of revolutionary enthusiasm or because the Gospels, from which they had removed its supernatural colouring, had become mixed in an ambiguous grisaille with the Declaration of the Rights of Man, or to rid themselves of a function which every day became more difficult and false, or perhaps from cowardice. Chumet rejoiced, and the Commune, not wanting to leave the people's imagination idle, instituted a great civic festival to replace the religious ones. It proclaimed the cult of reason, and on November 10, before the Statue of Liberty, raised in the place of the former Holy Virgin, voices were raised to celebrate the freeing of man. The convention, invited in the evening for a repeat performance of the festival, went as a body to Notre-Dame. Reason, in the person of Citizeness Montmoreau, came down from her throne and embraced the president of the convention. Heberism seemed to be the master of Paris and the revolution. With Heberism and anti-clericalism seemingly the masters of Paris, the cult of reason was met with mixed results. As can be expected, these activities outraged certain citizens, and not just the Catholics. Amidst the pomp and pageantry, many Jacobin stalwarts were incensed. Yet, before we examine how Robespierre and Danton countered these developments, I think it's best we look at the broader response to the cult. In particular, was this just a Paris phenomenon, or did it spread beyond the capital? Furthermore, to what extent was there any popular support for such atheistic festivities? If we try to quantify the cult's success using hard data, the results remain ambiguous. Firstly, the convention received just under 1,000 addresses concerning the cult of reason. These addresses referenced both festivals and temples, although the former could often occur without the presence of the latter. Now, 1,000 addresses represents somewhere between 2 and 3% of all French communes. That may sound like a failure for the new cult, but this figure is rather misleading. Not every commune was writing regularly to the convention, and if we analyse all addresses concerning dechristianisation, then more than a quarter referenced the cult of reason. Now, that indicates a much greater penetration throughout the Republic than the number of addresses alone. Moreover, if we then look at well-documented regions, such as the southern department of Gard, we see a very different picture. From Gard, the convention received a mere 36 addresses relating to the new cult. However, we know that more than 230 communes in Gard either closed their churches or converted them into temples. Put differently, the number of impacted communities was more than 6 times greater than the number of communities which sent letters to Paris. In fact, 230 communes represents almost 2/3 of the entire department. Thus, while Paris only received 1,000 addresses relating to the new cult, we can be confident that the number of communes impacted was well above that number. That said, the Mediterranean department of Gard experienced intense dechristianization. Consequently, it would be inappropriate to blindly apply its experience to the nation, as 2/3 of the country certainly did not have temples of reason. So, where does this leave us? Well, it's clear that the cult gained prominence in some corners, but not so in others. Like all anti-clerical activities, temples of reason were generally concentrated in select departments, generally those experiencing intense dechristianization. That said, festivals of reason could extend much further, especially when they were focused on patriotic messages rather than anti-clerical pursuits. But on the topic of patriotic messages, the residents of the capital were soon drinking the philosophical Kool-Aid. With ultra-radicals dominating the city's clubs, sections, and commune, it was in these local institutions that anti-clericalism spread with speed. For example, the section of Brutus renounced the religion of error, recognizing no other god than nature and no other religion than that of truth. Likewise, the section of Pikes declared that it would adore no other god than the god of liberty and equality. Not to be outdone, the section of Armed Men proclaimed that it acknowledged no other worship than that of truth and reason, no other fanaticism than that of liberty and equality, no other doctrine than that of fraternity and of the republican laws decreed since the 31st of May, 1793. Amidst this rhetorical enthusiasm, Chumet and the Paris Commune faced little opposition as they closed the capital's churches. Inaugurating temples of reason and arresting public dissenters, it is worth asking the question, how popular were these irreligious acts? Beyond the words of zealous ultra-radicals, there was genuine support for the cult of reason. The two cohorts most keen for this specific form of moral regeneration were ironically the urban elites and the Parisian sans-culottes. In the case of the former, historians like Timothy Tackett note that their commitment to Catholicism had steadily weakened since the 1750s. Children of the Enlightenment, it's perhaps unsurprising that fringe anti-clerical or even atheistic positions might gain greater popularity in a time of such social and political upheaval. Amongst the most militant sans-culottes, the movement's leadership made it clear that the clergy had deceived the people. Now that the nation had entered a new era, was it not right to embrace a new cult, more appropriate for the times? Moving past the capital to the nation more broadly, we can see in addresses to the convention some measure of popularity. With almost 1,000 letters concerning the cult of reason, it was quite common for the convention to hear praise and adoration like this letter from Verdun. Our two communes were the first to proclaim the cult of eternal reason, the only one worthy of a free and enlightened nation. May this example be followed by all our brothers in the Republic. May centuries of enlightenment and philosophy succeed centuries of ignorance and error. And may fanaticism finally be banished forever to Cayenne, along with the impostors who fermented it at the expense of pious and credulous people who they have deceived for so long. Yet, for all the praise of the cult of reason, and for all its success in certain parts of France, we should not kid ourselves that this movement enjoyed broad-based support. Instead, private correspondence shows plenty of hostility, even amongst committed Jacobins. From their perspective, these ludicrous masquerades were needless provocations. Endangering the revolution with a new, godless philosophy, similar concerns were registered by officials in the departments. Along the Spanish border, for example, reports noted that equating religion to fables and absurdities risked triggering rebellions rather than renunciations. Likewise, local police recorded that while some made giant steps in public, in private, superstition reigned supreme. Totaling the evidence, many historians come to three simple conclusions. Firstly, that dechristianisation and its cult of reason were generally unpopular. Secondly, that the movement had no chance of success in a nation as staunchly Catholic as France. Finally, that this campaign was immoral, an unjustified violation of the liberties the revolution sought to protect. Indeed, Adolphe Thiers writes of his disgust when surveying these crucial months. So, to end this episode, I want to probe these conclusions, particularly the first two. To what extent do scholars really agree that dechristianisation was both unpopular and doomed to fail? To start with, there is no shortage of scholars who highlight the movement's lack of enthusiasm. Historian Timothy Tackett is adamant that coercion and fear played a major role in the instigation of dechristianisation. Sure, the movement did have proponents in sections of society, but for most parts of the country, anti-clericalism was directly enforced by outside groups, usually arriving from Paris. Sharing these sentiments, many scholars conclude that dechristianisation was always likely to falter. For example, historian Simon Sharma describes the movement as the most inevitable and dismal failure of the entire revolutionary era. Importantly, hostility towards these developments can also be found in left-leaning sources. Historian Albert Merty, a huge fan of Robespierre, certainly disapproves of the campaign, which he views as destabilizing and insufficient. That said, Merty's criticisms have a unique twist. Skeptical that the cult of reason could ever have met the needs of the people, he intriguingly focuses on the motivations of its leading proponents. Conflicted over just how atheistic some Albertists truly were, the scholar tends to highlight the era's political dynamics. Believing that some moderate Jacobins were using dechristianisation to steal sans-culotte support from the ultras, Merty views these events through an unorthodox lens. Instead of seeing ultra-radicals pursuing national regeneration, Merty finds Jacobin factions using anti-clerical measures to outmaneuver one another for mere political advantage. Unsurprisingly, this does not incline him to be any less critical of the movement, which he views as endangering the revolutionary project. However, despite all this naysaying on dechristianisation, dissenting opinions are plentiful. On a topic as divisive and diverse as religion, some perspectives are a little out there. For example, historian Edgar Quinet argues that dechristianisers erred not in replacing Catholicism, but in advocating for the cult of reason. Instead, his revolutionary forebears would have been better off pursuing Protestantism as a means of national regeneration. Interestingly, this view was actually shared by some contemporaries, including Jacques Necker's fascinating daughter, Madame de Staël. That said, she was a committed Protestant, and it's slightly suspicious that her solution to the problem was coincidentally her own personal sympathies. But to momentarily digress, I do find that a brilliant question to ponder. What if the solution to the Catholic Church was not dechristianisation, but rather a religious divorce in the style of King Henry VIII? I doubt it was ever a viable option, yet it's a fun thought experiment nonetheless. Now, if we continue to explore this idea that dechristianization could never have succeeded, it's worth noting that there are very respected scholars who question this conventional wisdom. Take, for example, the French historian Alphonse Allard. Early in his career, Allard believed that dechristianization would inevitably be defeated thanks to the intensity of peasant opposition. But while he identified reason as a doctrine only dear to a bourgeois aristocracy, he was still willing to defend this anti-clerical crusade. Why? Well, for Allard, fellow historians who condemned dechristianization were too eager to judge these events through a moralistic lens. In doing so, they missed the fact that their campaign was a wartime necessity, one that was created in response to the sedition and subversion of the clergy. Put differently, it was not philosophy but patriotism that powered the pursuit of priests. Given that clerics were aiding the enemy, the Catholic Church could not be left untouched. However, later in his career, Allard came to doubt the consensus even further. Rejecting his earlier idea that defeat was inevitable, he began to view the vast majority of citizens as indifferent on the matter of religion. This was not the same as being hostile towards the cult of reason, and this conclusion had significant implications. The preeminence of indifference suggested that Christianity's strength was only superficial. Consequently, had dechristianization continued for a greater length of time, it's possible that Catholicism was firmly expunged. Contradicting the perspectives of many of his colleagues, Allard proposes a pathway for the movement's success. To defend the country and the revolution was the foremost aim against the priests, who showed themselves hostile. It seemed as if the priesthood was indestructible, except by the overthrow of its altars. That work was carried out by revolutionary patriotism and supported by a movement of free thought, which had long been bred through the intolerance of the state religion, while philosophers like Voltaire stimulated and disseminated it. Throughout the greater part of the country, the illiterate peasantry allowed things to take their own course, and this indifference almost suggests that these masses had never been thoroughly Christianized. It is a startling fact that the closing of churches and their desecration had not occasioned serious riots like those which shortly before had broken out through the persistence of some feudal rights under the Revolution. Supposing the success of the national defence had been delayed, and a liberating victory, had been delayed even by a few months, it is a question whether the protracted terror, considered as a dechristianizing factor, would not have dealt the death blow to the Catholic religion in particular, nay, to Christianity in general. Such sentiments are shared by contemporary scholars, such as historian Michel Vauvel. Rather controversially, Vauvel is eager to make the case that the term dechristianization might well be used for describing trends amongst the laity well before the revolutionary era. Using careful analysis of wills, documents, funerals, and other religious practices, Vauvel highlights what he sees as a steady erosion of traditional Catholic observance. Moreover, his research on the success of aspects of dechristianization and its lasting legacy into the 19th century in certain regions can be used to make the case that failure was far from certain. In short, Vauvel completely rejects Sharma's perspective that Christian belief was deeply rooted across the country. Instead, he argues that Christianity was waning, and that the dechristianisation campaign was not outright rejected by a population already questioning its faith. Yet, while historians continue to battle over the merits of the movement, one powerful Jacobin had made his own conclusions. Alarmed by atheism and fearful of the foreign plot, the time had come for a dramatic and forceful intervention. Robespierre would strike back.
Thank you for listening to episode 104, The Cult of Reason. In the next episodes, we'll take a short break from the main narrative to unwrap some Christmas presents. With special collaborations and fascinating interviews, we'll be welcoming the new year with a range of terrific content, including a bonus episode available exclusively to members of the Grey History community. After that, the backlash begins, as Robespierre denounces the excesses in Paris and confronts the rise of atheism. The revolution turns against the ultra-radicals who pushed dechristianisation to its limits. Of course, if you'd like to promote the cult of Grey History, please consider supporting the show on Patreon. For just a coffee or two a month, you can enjoy the virtues of ad-free listening, bonus episodes, and early access, and help keep this podcast alive as we navigate 1793 in 2026. So please, join the community today at patreon.com. Lastly, I wish you a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a fantastic start to the new year. Thank you for listening, stay safe, and have a great day.
Grey History is brought to you by its amazing community members, including the heroes of the Revolution, Brian, Jeff, Kevin R., Scott, Howard, Hilberto, Kevin S., and Griff. Joining the amazing heroes are the fantastic champions of the people: Cindy, George, William, Laura, Daniel, Monica, Adam, Tom, Eyal, Harold, David, Alistair, Jeff, Ritus, Cameron, Dan, Paul, Deborah, Susan, Danny, Gordon, Matthew, Sophia, Kevin, Scott, Jersey, Alvaro, Eric, the whole country of Luxembourg, Randy, and Barbara.